We're going to create an Ubuntu Linux virtual machine in Amazon Web Services. So I've gone ahead and I've logged into the Learner Lab course in the AWS Academy. I've started up my environment. I've got the green light. That means I'm ready to go. So I'm going to click that AWS button and it's going to open up the Web Management Console in a new tab. So here we go. High level, we are going to create a security group that's going to allow inbound traffic to this virtual machine. We're going to create the virtual machine, and then we're going to connect. And connecting to this Linux machine is actually going to be easier than connecting to a Windows machine because we can do it all through the Amazon Web Services console. So I'm just going to search for EC2, even though I see a couple of links to it right here. I just want to, no matter if you have those links or not, you can always search for EC2, find it there in the list of services. Bam, I want the electronic compute cloud to create virtual servers in Amazon's cloud. Now, if I go down this left-hand column, I want to go all the way down under networks and security, find security groups. I've got my default security group, and I've got another security group for a Windows server. Doesn't matter what exists, but I don't have one for Linux. So I need to create a security group. And it scrolls down, unfortunately. So I'm going to scroll back up. I don't know why, but it does. So I'm going to name it last name Ubuntu server SG for a security group. So instead of saying last name, I'm going to put my last name, Marquardson Ubuntu server SG. And you have to give it a description. It's not really optional. So we'll say Ubuntu server SSH and ICMP. That's just for your benefit. Whatever the VPC is, the virtual private cloud, just keep that. Yours will be different than mine. Everyone across the universe will have a different VPC ID there. Just leave it alone. You should only have one. So it'd be hard to select the wrong one because you should only have one at this point. So I'm going to add a rule, and we're going to have two rules. One is going to be SSH, the secure shell. So I'm going to choose SSH for the type. The source type, and again, here I'm going to choose anywhere IPv4. This would technically allow connections from anywhere on the internet, which, people aren't going to be able to log in unless they've got your private key, so that's okay. I'm okay with it. Ideally, you would limit that, but in this lab environment, it just makes things a little bit easier to keep that open. I'm also going to add another rule. I'm going to allow ICMP IPv4, and the source type is going to be anywhere. It's going to fill in that 0.0.0/0, which means any IP address will be allowed to initiate these connections to this server. So those two rules are good. SSH and all ICMP IPv4, all that's good. Outbound rules, by default, all traffic is allowed out, and we're okay with that. If we were worried about people in our company exfiltrating data, sending it somewhere we didn't want them to send it, we might modify that, but we're not so concerned about it. That's it. Create the rule, create the group with those two rules, and I'm going to click Create Security Group. It'll happen real quick. Here I've got my security group, Marquardson Ubuntu Server Security Group. So this is ready to be used. It hasn't been applied to any virtual machines yet because I have not created any virtual machines. So let's go ahead and do that. This is done. So over on the left, we're still in the EC2 service. So we can click Instances and we can take a look at our virtual machines. I've got one running right now. I happen to have a Windows Server virtual machine running. I don't need it right now, but I'm just going to ignore it. It can keep running. A company might have hundreds or thousands of instances running at any given time. So I'm going to launch an instance. We're going to create a new one. And I want to follow my instructions very carefully just to make sure we're all on the same page. So last name, Ubuntu server for the name. Mark Wordson, Ubuntu server. That'll be me. Now, what operating system do I want? In this quick start, we see we've got a bunch of options: Linux, Mac, Ubuntu, Windows, Red Hat, SUSE, lots of different choices. We already know we're going to choose Ubuntu, so I'm going to click on Ubuntu. And what does it give us? The server, so that's year 2024.04, April. LTS is long-term support, so we could run this for a very long time. Years and years, and Ubuntu is still going to push out security packages for it. So that will be good for us. Now the instance type, that's the hardware. So how much hardware do we want to give this thing? Sometimes Linux can work pretty well with just a little bit of hardware, but we might as well amp it up a little bit. We're going to choose T2 medium. Just note the cost. So Linux pricing, it's going to cost us 4.64 cents per hour. And by the time you're watching this video, the pricing might go down or up or sideways. Amazon's always changing it. So I'll scroll down because I've got the operating system selected. I've got how much hardware I want to throw at this virtual machine. And now for the key pair, there's only one key to select. So we want to select the VOC key. That's the private key. And I'm going to switch a tab real back to this Vocarium interface here. When I click that AWS details button, and it says your SSH key, this is the key that we just selected to apply to this virtual machine. So we're linking those two things together. Now the network settings, we want to customize this a little bit. So we're going to edit the network settings. So I've got to click that edit button. The VPC, we're going to keep that the same. The subnet, I want to choose the one that says 1E on the right-hand side. You can ignore all the stuff to the left. Just find the one that says availability zone US East 1E. We're going to get a public IP address automatically. That's great. Now here, we already created a security group, so we don't want to create a new one. Instead, we want to select an existing security group. This is a best practice. It's rare that you would want to create a new security group every time you launch an EC2 instance. So if I click this, I've got a couple of them. I've got the default one. I made one for Windows, but we just made one for Ubuntu. So I'm going to check that box. That's the one I want. You could apply multiple theoretically, but we don't need to do that here because that one security group has everything we need. Now, because we're special, we need to do the advanced network configuration. And we're going to change the primary IP address. So this will be the private IP address 172.31. Computers going slow. .50. I'm having trouble typing right now. 172.31.50.60. That'll be good. So yeah, again, every time this server is rebooted, it'll get a new public IP address automatically, but this primary IP address is a private IP address. That's going to stay the same every single time, which will be helpful for us. So that's good. So I set the primary IP. I'm going to scroll down. Under storage, this Linux machine is pretty efficient, so it doesn't need a ton of storage, but we're going to change the default to a 30 gigabyte hard drive, which is not huge. Hard drives on modern desktops, laptops come with terabytes of storage. We're using 30 gigabytes, so not that big. Oh, that's fine. Now we want to expand advanced details. There's a lot of stuff here we're not going to use, but we're going to use one thing. The Identity and Access Management Instance Profile. Just go ahead and expand that, and I've got to scroll down a little bit. We want to find the lab instance profile. This is just going to make it easier for us to work with this. The Learner Labs has some permissions set up that grant access. So selecting this just helps us later on. Okay, all that's good. Made those selections. We could keep everything else the default. Tons of different options that you can choose from, and if you don't know what they mean, don't worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and launch instance. And we should see success very quickly. Successfully initiated launch of instance, and then I get the ID. I can click there to take a look at this specific virtual machine. We can see its instance state is pending. Notice here I've got a filter. So we're in the instances link. When I clicked on that link for this specific instance, it gave me this filter. So it's only showing me this one instance. If I clear these filters, it'll show me all of them. You know, not a big deal. I'm going to expand this just a little bit. I'm going to hide the instructions temporarily. And I can click the refresh button to check that status. It's initializing. So they're creating the virtual machine, they're booting it up, they're assigning the IP address, they're setting the key, they're doing all the stuff that we asked them to do. They're making sure it's going to be an Ubuntu virtual machine, all of that good stuff. It'll take, 2 to 3 minutes for this to fully boot up. So I'm going to pause the video and just wait. Okay, I just refreshed again, and it says 2 out of 2 checks passed, which is fantastic. I'm going to expand the name here so I can read it fully. I've got Marquardson Ubuntu server. I'm going to check that box, make sure that nothing else is checked. Otherwise, I'm going to have confusion when I go to the next part, because what I want to do is connect to it. Now, if this was Windows, we would have to download a remote desktop file and decrypt the password for the administrator, all of that good stuff. But let's take a look. For Linux, it's so easy. I'm just going to click connect. And it tells us, yeah, you probably shouldn't have SSH open to all IP addresses, but we're going to live dangerously. All right, so we're going to connect. We're using the EC2 instance connect this time. It's just the easiest way to do it. And the connection type, we're going to connect using EC2 instance connect. We're not going to use an instance connect endpoint. What's the difference? Well, the other bullet point you got to pay for. It's a managed service. I can see my public IP address. No, it's different than the instructions just because it's going to be essentially a randomly assigned public IP address. The username should be Ubuntu. All this is fine. You could ignore this warning here. You have insufficient identity and access management permissions. I bet I do. I bet I'm good. I'm going to click connect. So yeah, 2 big warnings. Ignore them. I think one of the hardest things in cybersecurity or information technology is knowing when it's okay to ignore the warnings and when you should really pay attention to those warnings, because sometimes it can be hard to know. All right, now we have our connection to our Linux computer. It says, welcome to Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, gives me some other information, tells me about my hard drive usage. I see the IPv4 address. That's that private one that we created. So we've got a public and a private IP address assigned to this computer. Down here in the command line, I see the Ubuntu user at IP, and it's giving me the private IP address, which is fine. This is good. This is what we want to see. So what we're seeing right now is a command line interface. We're not connecting to this Linux computer with a graphical user interface. We don't see a traditional start menu that you might see on a Windows computer, or we don't see whatever you call that thing on the Mac, the application bar. So Linux can have a graphical user interface. If you install Linux on a laptop, you're probably going to get a graphical user interface. If you're using an Android phone, it's running Linux with the Android graphical user interface. If you use an iPhone, it's really the Unix operating system, a version of the Unix operating system with the graphical user interface. But under the hood, all of them have some kind of command line interface that you can access. And so we can run commands here. So here's a few commands that, we'll get into how to use Linux, but I can run pwd. That's going to print my current working directory. So I'm in the home Ubuntu directory. Think of home like the user's directory on Windows, and Ubuntu is your user account. So here are my files. So who am I? I am Ubuntu. That's my username. If I can run ls-al, that'll list all the files, including ones that start with a period. And so I've got a few files here, like I've got an SSH folder. We're connecting via SSH, so that shouldn't be super surprising. If these commands are very new to you, don't worry about it. If I cd // I change to the root directory. If I ls to list the files and directories here, I can see a bunch of stuff. And again, if this makes no sense to you whatsoever at this point, don't worry about it. But we can see, let's see, where's my home directory? There's home. We were just inside home, but we changed directories into a different directory. If I cd ~tilde and I run pwd to print my working directory, I'm back in my home directory. So I'm moving around navigating this. So we can run programs and work with this Linux system. We'll be doing quite a bit in here. Now, let's say I'm done using this for now. I can shut it down. I can stop it. It'll save the state. Meaning that any files or programs I make on this will still be there. I'm going to close this tab. And I'm going to select my Ubuntu server, and I'm just going to go to instance state. I'm going to stop it. Yep. Good warning message. So I'm going to be stop paying the per hour charges for running this machine, but I will pay, a couple cents per day to store, the couple gigabyte file that contains all the information on that computer on Amazon servers. Not a big deal, but they just want to make you aware of it. So it's stopping. Still stopping. It'll take just a little bit to shut down gracefully. We want to shut down gracefully. I want to show you reconnecting. It's so much easier than Windows because we can just use the same process. We can use the instance connect. Okay, it says it stopped. So to boot it up again with that Ubuntu server checked, I'm going to go to instance state and I'm going to start instance. And I bet you know what's going to happen next. I'm going to refresh. It's pending start. So a computer managing this virtual machine in Amazon's data center is telling it to boot back up. It'll take a little bit. Now it says it's running, but the status checks. It says it's initializing. So if I try to connect right now, it's going to fail. If I try connect, it's going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's going to say establishing a connection, but this connection is going to fail because it has not passed its status. Oh, it just passed them. It happened too fast. That's actually surprising. It hasn't passed the status checks, but it booted up enough that it actually allowed this connection. Usually you want to wait till you've passed the status checks before you even try. We're racing. It'll let us connect a little bit early before the management interface has realized that it's actually up. But this is good. It is running. The public IP address, it could be different from before, and it doesn't matter. We don't actually have to know what the public IP address is to be able to use the instance connect. Yeah, the status checks are taking a while. I'll just wait for them to come up, and I'll connect again just to show the process. If you try to connect too early, it just says, sorry, can't connect, and it's not a big deal. You just close that tab, try connecting again a minute later. I'm going to pause the video to wait for those status checks to fully complete. All right, I'm back up and running. I've got 2 out of 2 status checks. So according to Amazon's documentation, these status checks run every minute. So it is possible that your computer will be able to pass the status checks, but if Amazon's not going to check until 59 seconds later, then you're just kind of sitting there waiting for those status checks to run again. So not a big deal. But again, I've got it selected. I'm going to choose connect. EC2, like, don't touch anything on this page. Just scroll all the way down. Ignore those warning errors if you have any. Click connect. And we are connected. So I see my server name, Mark Woodson Ubuntu server. I see the public IP address. I see the identifier. You can close that, but I'll just keep it open. So if you have to take a screenshot or something to show like, hey, I did this, and it was actually me, it'd be right there in your screenshot. So if Linux is a mystery to you at this point, don't worry about it. We're going to go over a lot of Linux fundamentals. We'll use this Linux virtual machine to do things like some encryption, decryption, some other types of cryptography, some hashing. We'll install applications. You'll install the most fantastic snake game in the history of the universe. We'll do some fun stuff. But this is the process for how we will connect to it. Just thinking, if something went terribly wrong, you could terminate this. Terminating is not shut down. Terminating is the super delete. It's gone. You're not going to recover it. There's no undo by default here in the cloud. You could terminate it, just create a new instance. Like if you had the wrong IP address, you could just terminate this one, create it again with the correct private IPv4 address. If you forgot to select the VOC key when you were creating this instance, no big deal. Just terminate it, create it again, not a big deal. In the cloud, we're supposed to be agile. We're supposed to be able to create and delete things quickly and easily and be more agile. It's not like where you're buying a huge physical server and like trying to baby it to make sure nothing goes wrong. Ideally, we can build in failure, the ability to fail, into our infrastructure so that we can respond quickly to different kinds of needs. All right, so this is good. So right now, let's say I'm done with this, I'm done with class for today, whatever. I could go to instance state, I could stop my instances, or if I come back to the AWS Academy Learner Lab interface, if I click End Lab, yep, it's gonna shut down all these instances for me. So notice I hit the stop button over here to end lab. If I go back to my list of instances, it says that they're all stopping. Well, that's going to save me some of my credits. Note that you're not going to be billed your usage per hour, but you can burn through those credits if you oversize your hardware. Like if you want the extra large server that's going to cost twice as much per hour, or if you over provision the hard drive, so you've got like a 2 terabyte hard drive, that's going to cost more in storage per month. So we want to right size our hardware so that we don't burn through those credits. But you'll never get a bill sent to you. Amazon's not going to ask for your credit card for accessing these virtual machines, doing any of that kind of stuff. So we're good. When you come back tomorrow, when you click this AWS button, automatically your instances, when I click the Start Lab tomorrow and then click the AWS button, all your instances will boot up by default. So if you only want to work with Windows, or if you only want to work with Linux, you can stop the other instance so that you're not incurring those per hour charges, just to help manage your credits effectively. All right, hopefully you feel comfortable with that. We're going to use this quite a bit, and it's a good way to access Linux and learn how Linux works.